Hi there, my front-end friends. One of the biggest pain points that I hear about when it comes to making websites is making them responsive. So today we're going to look at how a simple shift in how you approach writing your CSS can make things so much easier on that front. Because here at my channel, everything I do is to help people fall in love with CSS, and if I can't get you to fall in love with it, hopefully I can at least help you be a little bit less frustrated by it. And to do that, one of the main things I want to focus on in this video is not looking at how you can do the same layout as I'm making now, but cover concepts that you can sort of put into every one of your projects that you're working on. And so we're going to be starting with this. I do have some CSS already written just to sort of style things up. Don't be intimidated by the custom properties and stuff if you're new and you don't know what that is. Basically though, nothing is applying to the layout itself right now. I just have, to make things not completely ugly. But that does bring me to sort of my first point actually, is right now I haven't really done any layout stuff. I've just done some sort of general styling, and you can see things are here, and it does not look fantastic by any means. There's a lot of weird stuff going on, but I actually have a responsive website right now. So if I come in here and I do an inspect, and I'm going to do my little responsive mode, which is here in Chrome. It's on the other side in Firefox. And when I do that, my website is basically responsive. There's a bit of a problem, and it's being caused by my images. You can see it's growing and it's shrinking, and stuff is going on with it. And that's like, if I come here and I actually remove all of my CSS, there's nothing in there. I just comment it out. I select all, Control / and it comments out whatever is selected. And it's still responsive. Now I have this image that's overflowing, which is sort of what's causing things to shrink down a little bit, because images are that one thing that sort of can actually cause problems. So that's often, you'll see CSS resets and things like that, where you'll have your image and then a display block and max width 100%. And the reason that we do that is because then my image will adapt to the screen instead of it being this really big thing that sort of shoots out the side. So now you can see that it's adapting as I'm doing that, and I have an ugly website, but at least it's working on all screen sizes with basically one line here. If you have large SVGs, picture elements, other things, you might have to add a few other things to the selector, but generally that's sort of the baseline of what we want to do. And that does mean that whenever you do run into issues with responsiveness, it means you wrote some CSS that caused it, and that sucks to hear. But it's not CSS's fault when that happens, right? It's our own fault, and often a misunderstanding of CSS and sort of how we should be working with it. So I'm just going to turn my other colors back on, so we're in a dark mode and stuff. It's a bit less bright for all of us, and we can keep on going. And we have some nicer fonts set up basically. For now, I'm going to turn off that responsive mode as well, though. We'll sort of turn it on and off as we need it and as we go through this. And the next thing that I want you to think about, because then there, where I was adapting the screen size, what was happening is everything was sort of just adapting on its own, right? So let's actually come, and I have if we look at my HTML all the way at the top up here, I have a header here that has some content in it. So let's go and grab that header for a second here. And you can see under my head now, let's get myself out of the way. You can see we have a background color on there just so we can see what we're working with. And I'm going to throw responsive mode on here again, because what I want you to look at is as this is getting narrower, you can see it's getting taller at the same time, right? So as this gets bigger and smaller, as the width gets narrower, the height has to increase because my content is changing in size. And this is a really important thing to understand about how any websites have to work and how the defaults work within the browser. Because what's happening is, what's the most important thing here is this content needs a certain area to work. So we're sort of looking at the width times the height. So as one is getting smaller, the other one has to get bigger, and as the height can decrease and increase in width. But we need to maintain that area so we don't run into any overflowing issues. So if I have a header like this, and I do want to set like a size for it, I don't want to come and say that I have a height. Because if I say height here, height of say 500 pixels, and I hit save, and actually my image is in there. So let's just go and turn off the image because we're not going to see this as clearly right now. So I'm just going to comment that out for the time being. Or let's come in with 600 now. And you can see that I have 600 pixels, which is fine. But then as we get narrower and narrower, at one point, this is actually spilling out the bottom and I'm losing content, and it's going behind this next image that we have there. And then of course, as I come this way, now I have that space that's available to me. And this is a problem because people like, for whatever reason, they like setting specific heights. And it might be because you're following a design or you have something else that you need to follow, and you're sort of working at it at your desktop screen sizes and everything's fine. And then you get to a smaller size and things overflow, and then you're like, oh, I need a media query or I need something else. You don't need that. We want to keep as much of those default behaviors as possible from the browser. So instead of setting things like widths and heights, and there's exceptions to these, but if I'm talking more about overall layouts, you don't want to set a height. Maybe what you need is a minimum height. So if I set a minimum height, and let's make this back to the 600 that we had before, it's going to be 600 pixels tall because that's the smallest it's allowed to get to. But if this content needs more space because we're getting narrower and narrower, so we need more and more height, at one point it hits that spot and it's allowed to grow. And you can see it's just getting taller and taller and taller because we're saying that's the minimum size it's allowed to be. And we can often do this with maximum widths as well. And there's a really common place you'll see that. I have set up a class of wrapper here. And so it's really common that on something like a wrapper, or this is, you might see it as a container, is a common name for this type of thing as well, where you get a max width on it, right? So I could say max width is 960 pixels or whatever I need it to be. And then when I get to that 960 pixels, and you can see here, it's stopped growing. It's getting to 916. It's never getting any bigger than that, but it's allowed to shrink. And I see some people approaching wrappers where they're going to build multiple breakpoints for it with media queries. So they're going to say that the width is 960 at a certain breakpoint, and then they get to another breakpoint and then another breakpoint. But the problem with that is sometimes you need to make changes to it. You have the same element that has like 6 different widths, and you have to find the one that you want to change. And again, you might be following sort of a Figma file or a design file that you have. You only have 4 versions or 3 versions or 2 versions or whatever it is that the designers actually made for the different screen sizes. So you don't always know exactly, and you're just following what you have there. But it just makes it so much easier to say that it's a max width instead of an actual width. And then the advantage with that is you can come in and you can say that it has a margin inline, which is a shorthand for the left and the right. It's a little bit different because it's a logical property. So if ever you had a vertical writing mode, it would change, but the inline axis in most of work you're going to be doing will be left to right, unless you're doing something in a language that would be a vertical writing mode instead. But we have our margin inline. I can do auto, and then it centers it, right? Margin left, auto, margin right, auto, and it centers that on the screen. And then we get this thing that's very adaptive because we're saying a maximum width. It cannot get bigger than that, but we want to allow it to shrink because if not, you have overflows. And then you have that opposite approach for your header here, because with heights, you definitely want the opposite. Widths, you tend to do max widths. Heights, you tend to do min heights. And it's a very safe approach to doing things. Now, let's say I was doing this guy, because this is like an about the author that has a little blurb about the author. That's somewhere where I might actually make a difference. If I come and take a look at that, just because this is sort of like the avatar. That might be something where I just set a width of 100 pixels and that's it, because that's just how big my avatar is. For small little elements where they're not going to cause overflow and you have a specific size, that's completely fine. Though sometimes just still putting a max width on there could be handy, because if it gets into certain situations, you might need it to shrink anyway. But setting a width on small elements, little icons, stuff like that is completely fine. But when you're going and you're trying to do layout wide stuff, I would really recommend, as much as possible, at least having this as your starting point and how you're going to start doing things to prevent problems from happening. Another thing that's super, super important is also don't declare stuff that you don't need, okay? Especially with your widths and your heights, because this is a problem I see all the time. I have a Discord community where people can ask questions and get help on stuff. And a lot of the time they have these little overflow issues or these little problems, and it's caused by declaring stuff they don't need. An example of that is coming on your body and saying that this has a width 100 VW and a height 100 VH, because people love viewport units. And if I do that though, if you take a look at this, and all the way down at the bottom here, I actually have a horizontal scroll now. Because on, at least on Windows in Chrome, we have these fixed scroll bars that come in like this one. And when we have that, the VW doesn't account for the scroll bar. It's looking at the whole width, including the space underneath the scroll bar. And so when you do that, you get these little things like this. And it's really, really frustrating. So my width on my body, and let's just highlight this. I'm going to come here and put a border of like 10 pixels, solid red, just so we can see it. You can see there's my body, and you can see, and I have a height 100 VW, which is why it's stopping there and everything's overflowing. But you can see like it's bigger than that. But let's turn off this 100 VW and hit save, and there's no width declared anywhere, and it's already filling up all